Welcome to Autism ADHD TV. It is the place to be for parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom psychologist who gets it. We dive into all kinds of important information like behavior, social skills, and learning. All right, let's get started. Welcome, Brendan Mahan. How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Holly?
Good. It's so good that you're here. I appreciate you being on the Autism ADHD podcast and Autism ADHD TV.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. So I'm going to introduce you. Brendan is an internationally recognized ADHD executive function expert, highly engaging, sought-after speaker, and the host of the ADHD Essentials podcast. A former teacher, mental health counselor, and principal, Brendan helps individuals, families, schools, and businesses manage the challenges of ADHD and neurodiversity through an approach that blends education, collaborative problem solving, and accountability with compassion, humor, a focus on strengths and growth, and his trademark wall of awful model, which we will talk about another time, right?
Yeah, sure. That's cool.
Definitely have to have you back on again. So today we're talking about swearing, cussing, however you want to say that, bad words, whatever works for you. This comes up a lot, I think, for kids with autism and ADHD.
Yeah, because so swearing is an easy way to get a response. It's an easy way to express your emotions and your struggles and frustrations and all that stuff. And with kids who are not always so socially skilled and socially sort of aware, they don't necessarily pick up on the downsides of it. So they're like, all I know is I get a response and that's what I want. And they're not seeing that long-term it's having a detrimental effect. So that's why it kind of comes up a lot.
I agree. And so what we're talking about too is children who want efficient ways of getting responses, and cruising's pretty efficient.
And also it elicits a really obvious response, right? So it's particularly with kids with autism, but ADHD kids too, to some degree. They don't always pick up on the more subtle responses that adults might present to them. And so when they're not sure, uncertainty leads to anxiety, right? So if I'm saying something like, I don't like this assignment, and the teacher's like, okay, well, you don't have to like it. And the kid's like, what does that mean? Like, do I still have to do it? Because they just told me that it's all right that I don't like it. But if the kids, am I allowed to swear on your show?
Sure, of course.
About swearing, because I don't have to. If the kid's like, well, this is a stupid assignment. Now the teachers are like, whoa, what do you mean? What, like, you're going to get a different response. One teacher might squash that. Another teacher might be like, oh, well, in that case, why don't you only have to do every other problem or something, and might make an adjustment because the kid swore. So they're seeing pain and struggle there that they might not have recognized otherwise if the kid just said, I don't like it. And the kid is getting a more obvious response, a more obvious result. So they're going to keep swearing.
That makes sense. And so you were also saying you might get a different response from different people, and that can be really confusing. Another thing when it comes to impulsivity, and you mentioned earlier, really struggling to see into the future consequence. So maybe you're faced with a difficult situation. Maybe someone is taking your phone away, or an electronic, or like you said, asking to do maybe a difficult academic task. And a child, all they see in that moment is frustration. They don't see past it. They don't see a way to maybe communicate in a more appropriate way in that moment. And then swearing comes out.
Right. Yeah. And because it's, so one of the things that I've been playing with recently is, in terms of communication, we sort of have two tiers in a way. and this is by no means perfect. I'm still playing with this concept, but one tier is like sort of cognitive, academic, logical communication, right? Like just the facts and the figures and the problem and da da da. And then there's this emotional level of communication where we're really in the emotions of the situation and we're not necessarily looking at it from a more detached academic perspective. And swearing is a really clear method of emotional communication. If I'm swearing, I'm probably communicating emotionally. And it doesn't necessarily have to be negative, right? I can say, like, that was the most amazing hamburger I've ever had in my life. And I really liked that hamburger. Or,
That was
you know
a
what I
great
mean?
hamburger.
Or like, yeah. Or like that movie was the like that stuff that I'm communicating emotionally. And so kids who are sort of playing with that emotionality and also experiencing big emotions, who have figured out swearing and figured out it elicits a response and figured out that swearing feels good, like just dropping the F-bomb, right? There's that little bit of like, ooh, I probably shouldn't do this, but there's also like some power in those words when you say them. And so all of that is at play in our kids swearing and why they're doing it and what we need to navigate in order to get them to do it less if they're kids that are just swearing left and right all the time.
Right. And I like how we're discussing the reasons kind of why, right? I think we need to know the why in order not to just respond in ways that aren't so helpful. So something that we had talked about is avoiding swearing ourselves. So tell me about that.
Well, like your kids are going to do what you model, right? So if you're swearing, your kids are going to swear. And that's all there is to it, right? Particularly if you're swearing without thought and without like using your words intentionally. If you're just like stomping around and blowing off some steam, your kids are going to do the same thing. And so if you don't want your kids to swear, don't swear. If you don't want your kids to have their face in their iPhones all the time, get your face out of your phone. Like whatever behavior you want your kids to do less of, wonder if you're doing that behavior and do less of it if you want them to do less, because they're learning from you, right? That's how that works. Um, so I'm just swear less, right? Or if you do swear, comment on it. Right? Like I've had times I don't swear at my kids, but I have sworn in the presence of my kids before. And we had a day when my kids just it was bad. I mean, they went to a Boy Scout meeting and it was like their first Boy Scout meeting and they didn't engage, and it was like COVID, so they were in a parking lot. Like everything is weird and terrible for contextually. But they didn't pay attention and they weren't talking to anybody, and they were like at one point all the other kids were standing up and they were still sitting in their chairs and they were just not engaged. And it's a brand new pack. And I couldn't go and correct anything because it's COVID, so the social distance. So I couldn't walk over to them and be like, "What are you doing?" So I just for an hour like watched my kids not do it right at all, like not even close. And a lot of that was the trauma of COVID and that kind of stuff. But they got in the car and I lost it on them on purpose. I wasn't out of control. I was like, they need to know just how unacceptable this was. And I said to them in the course of it, I was like, that's bullshit. Like what you just did, that was bullshit. You're doing da 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 da. You're not engaged. You're not tuned in. You're not paying attention. At one point, one of my kids was sitting on the ground with his folding tent or folding chair like on his head, like that level of sort of not engaged. And when I said like that's bullshit, I then paused and said, and I must be really if I'm swearing right now. And then I went back into it, right? And I intentionally dropped the F-bomb in the presence of my kids. And I did that like as an aside, like I didn't swear at them. I sort of like said to them, this is bullshit. And then turned and looked out the window away from them and said, and I must be really if I'm swearing right now. And then went back and launched back into them. And yeah, they were upset, but they needed it. Like that was a situation where they earned that particular diatribe from dad. They get like one a year probably. It doesn't happen much. But But pointing out like, oh, I'm swearing, I must be really angry, like clues them in, as opposed to just swearing. Because when you point it out, you're playing with things a little bit differently, right? If I'm just swearing, dad's out of control, right? But if I point out the fact that I'm swearing and that must mean I'm really mad, dad's maybe not out of control. Dad's got some self-awareness. Dad's got some control. He's managing this anger, but he's still coming at us with both barrels. So we messed up huge. Does that make sense?
It does. So it sounds like when, cursing less is something, a tip where, yes, your children probably curse less if you curse less. And then if you do get really upset and say something, address it. Don't act like it didn't happen. Explain why it happened. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. Something you mentioned too about if a parent is cursing or maybe another family member or whoever that they might be modeling after, oftentimes differently wired children are very stuck on ideas and fairness. And I think all of our listeners and watchers are thinking that, yes, definitely nodding. Because if even a parent curses, they should be able to. Yeah. Or if a sibling did, they should be able to. And being really stuck in that. So I can see how it would be less confusing for them if somebody wasn't cursing. I know that I had said, I think I almost said T and I stopped myself. And to this day, the kids bring it up. I mean, that was, I don't know, 2 years ago or something. And so, they'll still bring it up. And it really does make a big impact on them, I think. But if you're doing it all the time, that would be something they would probably do more often. So I can understand that tip.
Yeah, and the fairness of it too, right? Like if you just take it out of the world of swearing and right, like if you're eating chocolate chip cookies all the time and you're like, oh, well, I'm an adult and I'm allowed to eat chocolate chip cookies and you can't have any. What? Like that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. Like that's ridiculous. But with swearing, we do that, right? We're like, well, I can swear like a sailor and it doesn't matter because I'm 48 years old, but you're 10. So don't.
So when you're 18, you can.
Right. Like it doesn't make any sense. So if like, and I was a 6th grade English teacher. So and I've worked summer camps and school stuff a lot. So I am pretty solidly trained to not swear. Because that you don't do that when you work in summer camps and you're working in schools and that stuff. You just don't walk around swearing all the time. And so for most of my formative years as an adult professional, that was my experience. And it doesn't have that big of an impact on me. It doesn't mess things up too much, except that when I do swear, people notice. And that matters too, that perspective, right? Like when I taught 6th grade, as soon as a kid swore, I had to jump into my swearing speech. One time it happened on the first day of school and I was like, oh, this kid's going to be hard because he dropped an F-bomb day one, like 15 minutes in the class. But my swearing speech is pretty straightforward. Here's the deal. And it helps that I was an English teacher so context matters on that part. But I would say, here's the deal, guys. If you write an essay and you end every sentence with an exclamation point, you kind of look bad. Like it looks like you don't know how to write. It looks like you don't really have an understanding or mastery of what you're doing. It looks bad. But if you use one exclamation point in that entire essay, that exclamation point becomes incredibly powerful. And you want to use it judiciously and with some skill. And swearing is the same way. If you're swearing all the time, it loses its power and it makes you look like you don't have that much of a mastery of the English language, like you're not that skilled. But if you drop one F-bomb in the course of 6 months, right? That's a powerful F-bomb. I have friends in high school and that I still see, right? And if I swear in their presence, everything stops. And Brendan said a bad word, like, because that's my reputation is I'm like, not only that I don't swear, but also that like, I'm sort of the goody two shoes. Like that's kind of my jam. But if that's your deal, you have this extra layer of power that not everyone gets to have. And you lose it the more you use it. Swears lose their power the more often you use them. And what kids want out of swears is the power. So you may as well like teach them how to do it the right way, which is what I do with my kids. I'm like, this is how swearing works. This is when and when not to use it. This is sort of culturally and situationally when it's okay, when it's not okay. Like swear your heads off with your friends. That's fine. In class, don't swear at home. Don't swear like basically in the presence of adults and people of more power than you. Don't go swearing. It's not a good plan. And with kids that are younger than you, don't go swearing. It's not a good plan. Like, and it ends up heading down this interesting road of like talking about power dynamics, talking about social interactions and social dynamics and all that stuff, all of which is useful to know about.
Definitely. And so I like how you were saying basically the who, the when, and the how. Mm-hmm. And I feel exactly the same way. I know it is going to happen. So I come from a place where I am not, of course, you know, I've been a therapist for almost 24 years now. There's nothing I haven't heard. And I've heard some really creative ways to use curse words. I'm sure you have too.
Yeah.
And some of them kind of impressive. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. But looking at it as though, okay, we know this is likely to happen. It's not surprising. So how do we teach what that looks like? Because if we expect zero curse, I'm not sure that's quite realistic, and it may constantly set this child up for failure.
Right.
So looking at it a little bit different, personally for my children who my oldest son is autistic and has severe ADHD. My youngest son has severe ADHD as well. And so, you know, I knew already, because I had done this for a living before we adopted them, I knew this was probably going to become an issue, and it did. So basically teaching that who and how and when. And when it did become an issue is where and with who can you. So definitely in the car with me, windows up, by the way, I had heard that, you know, learned that the hard way. So windows up, have at it. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what they could do is earn them. They could also earn curse words. So if they didn't say any curse words that day, they could absolutely earn one. And they could say it at home whenever they wanted, as long as it wasn't towards a person. Mm-hmm. So that was something that they can earn, and it was really funny. Like, Mom, did I get my curse word today? And I'm like, absolutely. What is it? Make it count. You know? and the thing is, Brendan, I got to really know the words they knew, which really was a good thing, because some of these words I was not aware they knew. So that was an educational experience as a parent, because I want to know what they know. Also, if they cursed outside the cursing time or the place, then they had to curse for a whole minute straight. And that's actually not as easy as you would think. And oftentimes they'd say, okay, I'm done. I'm like, no, I want to hear more. I want to hear all of them. And so they had to do this straight. It's like, if you want to curse, you can. But now here's the thing. You broke the rule. So now you have to curse for a whole minute straight. And I know it sounds very unconventional, but they got so tired of it. It wasn't fun.
And the way that we worked it in my family is, when my guys were young, I was very like, nah, I don't want to hear words like that out of your mouth. Right. And then as they aged, that sort of shifted. Right. And I remember at one point, my kid, I have identical twin sons. And one of them was very upset one night. I think he was third grade. So what is that? 7 or 8, maybe. And he was really struggling. Like, he was in a really bad, high anxiety, struggling moment. And he kept like mouthing something. And I'm like, Bud, what is it that you want to say? Like, just say it. He's like, no, you'll be mad at me. And I'm like, it's okay, pal. Like, you're struggling. I can tell, like, I love you. Just what's going on? And he goes, the world. And I looked him dead in the face and I was like, I love you. And I gave him a hug. And it was the most important interaction that I've had with him probably for thus far, because he was expecting to say that and for me to totally reject him and be upset because I'd had a pretty hard line on swears. And he has this anger in him, or he had at the time, he had this anger in him that I had trouble relating to be honest. But making it safe for him and letting him be vulnerable in that moment allowed us to progress forward in our relationship as father and son, and allowed him to feel safe with me when it came to those moments of anger and frustration and feeling like he wanted to swear and that kind of stuff. So sometimes you have to like hear past the swear, which can be hard for parents. You hear, especially younger kids, but even teenagers, you hear those swears and they kind of bring you up short. And you're like, my kid is angry, my kid is hurting, and we get stuck there. And instead of dealing with the vulnerable underbelly that our kid is showing us and the pain that our kid is showing us, we get offended by the swear and we miss all of this much more important stuff. So on the one hand, you got to be tuned into that, right? And then the other piece is that we did with our kids is we just sort of shifted things around with our language a little bit, almost by accident. What happened was we watched the movie Stand By Me, which I loved as a kid. I watched it all the time, but apparently I watched the edited version and didn't know I was watching the edited version. And also, like, swearing was a lot more common in movies back in the 80s and 90s than it is now. So I didn't realize just how many F-bombs were in Stand By Me. Like, Stand By Me is in terms of language, is like a filthy movie. Like it's rated R and there's no violence or nudity in it. It's just entirely language rated R.
Okay, Brendan, so, I must have seen the edited version as well.
Yeah.
I don't know those parts.
It was significant enough that we paused it halfway through and like did a debrief as parents. And some of it is like the older teenage boys talking about stuff they're doing with girls. And some of it is just the kids are being like 12-year-old kids swearing their heads off as they go through the journey in the woods. So we paused the show and we're like, guys, we know you can handle this, da, 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 da. And my kids took that phrase of we know you can handle this and like hit the moon with it. It was such an honor to them to see that their parents understood that they could handle these swears and they weren't going to go running around swearing their heads off just because they saw it in a movie. And to the point that after that, we would be watching other movies and like a swear would come up and the two of them would be like, yeah, but we can handle this because we saw Stand By Me. Because they were like 9 at the time or whatever, right? We didn't think it was that bad. Yeah. And so doing that, giving your kids that dignity, and we didn't do it on purpose. We just kind of stumbled into it, but it ended up being a pretty powerful tool of one, we know you can handle this. We believe you can handle this. And then they're going to step up to that level. They're going to understand the implication is by watching this movie, you're not going to swear your heads off. You're just going to recognize that's what's happening in this movie or in this song or this album, for example. Right. And then the other thing that happens is now you're not the one modeling how to swear. The people in the movie are. So your kids are still learning like the syntax and the way that you use these words, because that's important. They should get that so they don't wander into a group of their peers and they like use the word incorrectly. And their friends are like, oh, look at you, innocent moron. So that's helpful. But we can use media to leverage this as well. And we can even if you've got a movie where most of the characters aren't swearing and one character is, odds are that character is going to be poorly depicted. Like they're going to be someone who's struggling or someone who's of a different social status or someone who is more angry and violent than everyone else or something, right? And if you can juxtapose that character to everyone else, and what does it mean that he or she swears more than these other characters? And what is that telling us about swearing? You can even play with that sort of thing to help teach your kids what swearing is all about and sort of the prejudices and biases and accuracies that come out of seeing someone swear.
I like that example. And an easy way to do that, I think, and I know a lot of our watchers and listeners already do this, but going on to Common Sense Media, they will probably list the curse words that are in a show or a movie. So if that's a road you want to go down, it sounds like that might be a good way too, just to get ahead of it. So that way you're not surprised.
Yeah. And by the way, teach your kids about Common Sense Media, because my kids go to Common Sense Media to see if they want to watch a movie or not.
I do too.
So yeah, like they'll come back and be like, I don't know, Dad, because it said this. For them, it's mostly sex stuff. They're like, we don't want to go anywhere near sex and nakedness because that makes them incredibly uncomfortable. I'm like, cool. I'm glad you know that.
Self-awareness.
Yeah. Right.
Very good. And you mentioned a few things, and we talked about how it's important to recognize our own physiological reactions, whether you are a parent, a therapist, an educator. We bring different histories to the table with cursing. You know, for instance, shut up was a curse word growing up in my house. And we were not allowed to say any curse words, even things that weren't curse words technically. So
yeah, shut up, crap, sucks, all that stuff in my head. Those are all swears to me. Those are like low tier swears.
Yes. And I think we need to be mindful about what we bring to the table ourselves in our histories.
Yeah. And that language changes, right? Because sucks is not a swear anymore. It's just a thing people say. But for the longest time, I was like, don't say that.
Right. And so it's really being mindful, isn't it? You know, so we recognize that these feelings are coming up for us, even if they're upsetting to us, we still need to calm ourselves down, regulate ourselves before we respond.
Right. Yeah. And those low tier swear words that we're sort of playing with are good for giving kids alternative to swears. Right. Like, and I always caution parents, like, it can't be too corny, right? You can't be like, gee willikers, like that doesn't work. Your kid's gonna look at
no, that would be a major bullying situation. We do not.
But if you can get clever with it, then it becomes useful and it becomes a way to avoid either much stronger swears or swears in general, right? Because I'll use words like craptacular, which it's just juxtaposing the word crap with the word spectacular, because it's fun. Like, it's fun and silly. It takes the sting out of the word crap. It adds another layer to it to make it feel significant and big and has the same sort of power of an F-bomb without being an F-bomb. And so if you've got the kind of like fun playing with language stuff that an English teacher would have, I guess, you can come up with things that are useful in that way. Or even like, it's one thing to say like, oh, like you're playing cards and you're like, my hand sucks, right? Like, that's one thing. It's another thing entirely to say like, yeah, I've just got a big truckload of suck. Like, that's more entertaining. And but it's still low tier. You're not like, my hand is shitty or anything like that. You're just like, so you can take those lower tier swears that don't even feel like swears anymore and mix them with a suffix or a prefix or another, sort of illustrative and imaginative phrase, and get a lot of mileage out of that and avoid the more intense stuff. And if you're doing that as a parent, now you're modeling that kind of more colorful, not colorful language.
I like that. And I also like the idea of getting them in on that. Right. So it's, let's come up with something. You know, I'm going to have some ideas. You can have some ideas, and we'll figure out what you feel most comfortable saying in situations like this, and really have it be a collaboration.
Yeah, exactly. Because you've got to give them options. And if it's almost like watching a sitcom or like a 1 hour sort of dramedy, like Dawson's Creek, kind of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, those WB shows that were out in the 90s that had really amazing language. Like, no kids talk like that. But in those shows, the kids did talk like that, and they didn't swear. They had other ways to express strong emotion. And that, playing with that, go watch a few of those episodes, see what you can steal, right? And build upon. That's how you get your kids to swear less, but still have the kind of vibrant language and vibrant language skills, I guess, that will get them to be able to express themselves in the way that they want to.
I like that. And it sounds like if you want to supercharge the use of these alternate words. You may even want to consider, and we had, done this in addition to our other strategies back in the day when cursing was really exciting and new. That, a reward for using the alternative words. And so really it's a very powerful combination of strategies in a bundle to really address cursing effectively and efficiently. So again, if your child is really struggling, or you have a student, or you're a therapist as your client, there are a lot of strategies that you and I talked about today that you can put together into a really helpful treatment package for cursing.
Yeah. And the number one thing that you need to do is be mindful of your emotional response to your kid swearing.
Right.
Right. Including your emotional response to your kid not swearing. Because if your kid, sort of like you're saying, right, using those alternative strategies, if your kid is in that really angry mode that typically they drop an F-bomb and they don't, they're just like making a face or whatever, or making a fist or something. There's a lot of parents that I've worked with, I've watched them do this, where their kid isn't doing the thing that they are trying to avoid doing, the thing we're working on. The kid doesn't do that, but all of the emotionality that comes with that behavior is still there. And the parent jumps on them for the emotionality because the parent feels threatened by that emotionality. And now the message is you didn't succeed, right? Like, you thought you were succeeding by not dropping an F-bomb, but turns out that's not what success looks like. What success looks like is not having those strong emotions in the first place, or at least not showing them. And that's not fair. If you want to get your kid to be able to not show those strong emotions, you got to reward them for not swearing or not doing whatever it is that those emotions elicit. And then sort of scaffold up to the next thing and up to the next thing until finally they're able to manage those emotions more effectively and regulate them better. But that takes a while.
It does take a while, and it's consistency and them being heard and communication and all the things that go into them trusting you with information, them being able to respond. You had mentioned something earlier that you got me thinking about. One of my sons had dropped the F-bomb when he was incredibly upset. And because we've done all these strategies in the past, this is very, unlikely that he would do this in the first place, but it was only to me. And he was very, very upset about something that had happened between him and another person. And he didn't get in trouble. We talked through it, what was happening for him. He was really hurt. He was really upset. And if I would have, like you said, stuck on just him saying that word, and then he would have been punished for being upset, and now I'd never know why. And I wouldn't have been able to help him and help him communicate his way through that, because everyone has big emotions, everyone, but especially these kids have even bigger emotions, plus have a hard time regulating them. So we can't punish them for being upset.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense.
And if anything, compliment them on the use of the F-bomb. Right? Like that, why not? Right? Like, I've done that. If your kid is really upset, really angry, and they drop the F-bomb and they do it appropriately, you want to take the wind out of that rage sail, compliment your kid on their use of the F-bomb. Because they are not expecting it. They're not expecting you to be like, good use of the word fuck. Like, it'll just deflate everything. And you're like, good use of the word F. That's going to bring them up and like, what does that mean? And now we just flipped to cognitive communication instead of emotional communication. We just went from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, and we can get somewhere now. They might go back into the amygdala, back into those emotions. That might happen, but we pull them out for a little bit. And if we can calm them down a little bit more, we're going to get further in that conversation. So keep that in your back pocket too, as a way to surprise your kids, ladies and gentlemen.
Definitely. And that is a good distraction technique too. Not only, like you said, to deflate that, a big feeling that, when the amygdala takes over, hijacks, however you want to say that, brings them to, wait, I'm a little confused. I can't believe my parent just said that. And that can bring that frontal lobe back online as well. I like that you brought that up.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so good, Brendan. I'm glad that you joined us today. I think we gave our watchers and listeners a bunch of great strategies.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
It has been fun. So I know that people are going to want to know how to find you and learn more about you. How can they do that?
The best way is to just go to ADHDessentials.com. ADHD, ESSENTIALS.com. I have a podcast called ADHD Essentials as well. Same spelling. That's probably the best place to find me. There's a Facebook community out there on Facebook. It's also called ADHD Essentials. Everything's ADHD Essentials, including my Twitter. So yay branding, I guess.
I will make sure that I link that for everyone in the show notes, and that way they can find you.
Cool.
Awesome. Brendan, thank you so much. I really appreciated you coming on today.
Thank you, Holly. I appreciate you having me.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. It may just be what they need to watch today. If you're a parent, I'd love if you came on over and joined our Facebook group, Autism ADHD Group for Parents. If you're a therapist or educator, come on over to our group, Autism ADHD Group for Therapists and Educators. You're going to find those links right down there in the notes. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses, Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.